You ever wonder what secrets your grandparents carried? The kind they tucked away like an old letter in a dusty attic, waiting for the right moment to share? My grandfather, Henry, was one of those men. A proud American, born in the heart of Ohio in 1925, who lived through the Great Depression, World War II, and the golden age of apple pie and Sunday drives. For 40 years, he held on to something he never told a soul, not his wife, not his kids, not even me, until one quiet evening on his porch, with the fireflies dancing and the crickets singing, he finally let it out. What he said changed everything I thought I knew about him, about family, about what it means to be American. This is the story of why my grandfather waited 40 years to say this. Henry was the kind of man you'd find in every corner of this great country. A farmer's son who grew up with dirt under his nails, who knew the value of a hard day's work and a handshake that meant something. He was 18 when he enlisted in the army in 1943, ready to defend the Stars and Stripes. He fought in the Pacific, saw things no young man should see, and came home with a purple heart and a heart full of stories he'd never share. Like so many of his generation, the greatest generation, he believed in keeping things close to the chest. No use dwelling on the past, he'd say, tipping his John Deere cap with a smile. But there was one story he couldn't bury, no matter how hard he tried. It wasn't about the war, or the farm, or the life he built with my grandmother, Betty, in their little house with the wraparound porch. It was about a promise he made in 1945, right after the war, when he was just 20 years old, standing on a dock in San Francisco, watching ships come home. A promise to a stranger that would haunt him for decades. That stranger was a man named Tommy, a fellow soldier from Brooklyn who didn't make it home. They'd met in a foxhole in the Pacific, two kids from opposite ends of America, bonded by fear, hope, and a shared love for baseball. Tommy was a die-hard Yankees fan, Henry rooted for the Cincinnati Reds. They made a pact: if one of them didn't make it, the other would carry their story home. Tommy handed Henry his journal, filled with letters to his sweetheart, Mary, back in New York. "Tell her I loved her," Tommy said. "Tell her I was brave." Henry promised he would. But when the war ended, and Henry came home, he couldn't find Mary. He tried, God, did he try, but life got in the way. The farm, the family, the years, they all piled up. For 40 years, that journal sat in a locked box under Henry's bed. Every Veterans Day, he'd pull it out, read a page, and put it back, guilt weighing heavier each time. He'd think about Tommy's laugh, his stories of Coney Island hot dogs, his dreams of opening a little deli with Mary. Henry wanted to keep his promise, but shame stopped him. What would he say? "I'm sorry I waited so long. I'm sorry I failed." He was a man of his word, and breaking that promise ate at him like rust on an old Chevy. Then, one summer night in 1985, as we sat on his porch in Ohio, sipping iced tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon, he told me. I was 25, just starting my own life, thinking I knew everything. He pulled out that journal, its pages yellowed, its leather cover cracked like the lines on his face. "I made a promise," he said, his voice low, like he was confessing to a priest. "And I broke it." He told me about Tommy, about the war, about the letters that were never delivered. He told me how he tracked down Mary years later, only to learn she'd passed away in 1978, never knowing what happened to her Tommy. Henry cried that night. First time I ever saw him cry. Not for himself, but for Tommy, for Mary, for the life they never got to share. But that wasn't the end of the story. Henry didn't just tell me to unburden himself. He had a plan. He'd found Tommy's nephew, a man named Paul, living in upstate New York. Paul was a history teacher, a man who'd grown up hearing stories about his uncle Tommy, the war hero. Henry wanted to give Paul the journal, to finally keep his promise. But he was scared, scared Paul would hate him for waiting so long, scared it wouldn't mean anything after all these years. "I'm too old to make this right," he said. But I looked at him, my strong, stubborn grandfather, and said, "You're never too old to do what's right." So, we went. Me and Grandpa, on a road trip from Ohio to New York, just the two of us and that journal. We drove through the heart of America, past diners serving meatloaf and mashed potatoes, past 4th of July parades with kids waving sparklers, past churches where hymns floated out open windows. Along the way, Henry told me stories I'd never heard, about the war, about his dreams, about the America he loved, flaws and all. He talked about how this country gave him a chance to build a life, to raise a family, to believe in something bigger than himself. And he talked about Tommy, a kid who never got that chance. When we met Paul, it was like time stopped. He didn't hate Henry. He didn't judge him. He hugged him, tears streaming down his face, and said, "Thank you for bringing him home." That journal, those letters, they gave Paul a piece of his uncle he'd never known. They gave him closure, a connection to the past, a reminder of the sacrifices that built this country. Henry kept his promise, 40 years late, but he kept it. And in that moment, I saw my grandfather not just as a farmer, a veteran, a family man, but as a hero. My grandfather passed away in 1990, but his story lives on, in me, in Paul, in the America we all share. He waited 40 years to say what he needed to say, to do what he needed to do. And if there's one thing I learned from him, it's this: it's never too late to make things right. For the folks out there, maybe in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, watching this from your living room in Texas, your farm in Iowa, or your apartment in Chicago, think about the promises you've made, the stories you've carried. Maybe it's time to share them. Maybe it's time to keep them. Because in this great country, where second chances are as American as baseball and apple pie, it's never too late to be the person you promised you'd be.